Of all the singers in this series, the one whose name I'm sure will be least familiar to the British public of today is the German lyric soprano Tiana Lemnitz. Had she been born a couple of decades later than she was, her life would have been one of jet aeroplanes and stereo recordings, television shows and lasting fame. As it was, the peak of her career exactly coincided with the heyday of Adolf Hitler. So the war, to a considerable extent, robbed her of the international acclaim which her artistry so richly deserved. Tiana Lemnitz with the opening of the Countess's aria Dove Sono from The Marriage of Figaro. Mozart was a composer in whose music Lemnitz particularly excelled, and one of the few roles in which the Covent Garden public did have a chance to admire her was Pamina in The Magic Flute. By a stroke of luck, Sir Thomas Beecham not only conducted her in the role on stage, he also made a full recording, quite a rare thing to happen in those pre-war days. And so at least one of Lemnitz's most famous interpretations has been preserved in its entirety. A favourite number of mine from this incomparable score is the duet sung by Pamina and the comic half-man, half-bird Papageno. They're basically expressing the familiar view that it's love that makes the world go round. They're not in love with each other, and there's nothing the remotest bit passionate about it. It's Mozart up to his old trick of achieving perfection by what sounds like the simplest of means. And that was the keynote, too, of Lemnitz's approach to singing, a totally unfussy pursuit of the beautiful. Tiana Lemnitz and the baritone Gerhard Hüsch, a famous partnership of pre-war days in Mozart's The Magic Flute. Lemnitz was a classic product of the best traditions of German operatic upbringing. She was born on October the 26th, 1897, in the town of Metz. Both her parents were musical, her father was a military bandmaster, and she took her first singing lessons at the age of 15. She was 23 when she made her professional debut in the little theatre of Heilbronn, and she then proceeded very methodically to climb the ladder of the German provincial opera houses. In Germany, every town with a population of more than 100,000 or so has its own opera house. And I always compare the system with professional soccer in Britain. You have first, second, third and fourth division houses, and if you catch the right people's attention, you get talent spotted up the league. Lemnitz learnt her trade during 7 years in Aachen. Then she was promoted for a further 5 to Hanover. She did some guest performances in a first division house, Dresden, and then, at the ripe old age of 36, she was ready for the top of the table, Berlin. There, her extensive repertoire included quite a number of Italian roles, and it's interesting to hear in some of her Verdi recordings how the stylistic restraint which she'd acquired from her German training does pay real dividends even in this more flamboyant sort of music. Here's the aria which Leonora sings in the last act of Il Trovatore, as she lurks outside the grim fortress in which her lover is imprisoned. It's really a very private aria, and although Lemnitz in her 1941 recording sings it in the German translation, it's a rare pleasure to hear the soft high notes taken really softly and Verdi's carefully marked trills really trilling. Tiana Lemnitz as a touchingly vulnerable Leonora in Verdi's Il Trovatore. One of Lemnitz's most fervent admirers in those Berlin days just before the war was a very junior member of the opera company, Elisabeth Schwarzkopf. And she told me recently that she still quotes Lemnitz to all her students as the perfect exponent of the head voice. We young singers, Madame Schwarzkopf recalled, had a very respectful nickname for her, Tiana Lemnitz. And believe me, that piano went right to the back of the biggest opera house. Although Lemnitz excelled in many other Italian roles besides Leonora, her staple diet really consisted of true and virtuous German maidens such as Elsa in Lohengrin and Elisabeth in Tannhäuser. When she made her Covent Garden debut in 1936 as Eva in Meistersinger, the critic Ernest Newman, not a man to be easily pleased, wrote, "She sings like an artist to whom singing is a lovely thing in itself," while one of his colleagues declared that she had ravished the eye as well as the ear. But to judge from Lemnitz's recordings, I hardly think that even these famous interpretations could have outstripped her rendering of another heroine with a blameless heart and long blonde plaits, Agatha in Weber's Der Freischütz. Here she is awaiting the return of her betrothed, a young forester who's been taking part in a vital shooting contest. "How can I go to sleep," she asks, "until I've seen him and heard his news?" And I don't think even Lemnitz ever recorded a more gorgeous phrase than the final one of the opening recitative. Wie schön die Nacht, how beautiful the night. That famous recording of Agatha's second act aria from Weber's Der Freischütz was made in 1939 and was one of the last that Lemnitz made before the war. As soon as the war was over, Walter Legg, the great impresario of the British recording industry, made sure of renewing Lemnitz's contract with EMI, and in 1948 she recorded Agatha's second great solo from Act 3. When one hears how little had changed in the poised and immaculate delivery of Tiana Lemnitz, it's hard to remember the turmoil and catastrophe which anyone in Berlin had lived through during the years between. Tiana Lemnitz giving no hint of her 50 years as Agatha in Weber's Der Freischütz. Another German composer who featured regularly in Lemnitz's repertoire was naturally Richard Strauss. And I think my personal favourite amongst her Strauss recordings is the duet from Act 2 of Arabella. Arabella, a Viennese debutante, has met her Mr. Right, and her attitude, I fear, may not please ardent feminists. "You will be my lord and master," she sings in a rapturous duet. "Your house will be my house, and," an essentially Viennese touch this, "in your grave I shall be buried at your side." The soprano line starts quite low in the voice. Then, as the baritone joins her, she moves into the higher octave, where Lemnitz and her famous head voice float along with a seraphic quality of tone, marvellously evocative of love's young dream. Tiana Lemnitz, this time very much in love with the baritone Gerhard Hüsch, in part of a scene from Richard Strauss's Arabella. As I mentioned earlier, Lemnitz's appearances on the international circuit were curtailed by politics. When she was invited to make her debut at the Metropolitan Opera, New York, in 1938, she was expressly forbidden to go there by Hermann Göring, who was in supreme charge of German cultural life. Perhaps he feared that, like Lotte Lehmann, Elisabeth Schumann and others, she might not come back. Who knows? In any case, Lemnitz never felt greatly deprived by the comparative lack of international recognition. In Berlin, she was a member of an outstanding ensemble, working with conductors of the highest caliber, and she was very much a servant of her art, not a chaser after fame and fortune. With that wondrous vocal ease of hers, she was, of course, also in great demand as an interpreter of the German classical songs, or Lieder as they're generally known. When in the 1930s a society was formed to record and promote interest in the songs of Hugo Wolf, a dozen or so leading artists of the day were engaged, with Lemnitz among them. One of the songs allotted to her was Wiegenlied im Sommer, Summer Cradle Song. It consists of 3 verses, each of which ends with the words Gute Nacht, lieb Kindlein, gute Nacht. Good night, dear little child. In the first verse, the baby's mother imagines the words being sung by the one bird which has not yet popped off to its nest. In the second verse, by the flies which are gently buzzing round the cradle. And in the third, by the baby's guardian angels. It's a classic example of the art which conceals art, and it's nowhere near as easy to sing as Lemnitz makes it sound. Tiana Lemnitz with Hugo Wolf's Summer Cradle Song. A voice used as skillfully and as wisely as Lemnitz's deserves to last a nice long time, and hers did. When she took her final bow in her 60th year with a recital of songs by Brahms, Wolf and Wagner, she was still providing an object lesson in how it's done. Thereafter, for some years, she ran the Berlin State Opera's Studio for Young Singers, and I'm happy to say that today, at the ripe old age of almost 92, she's still living in Berlin, hale and hearty. Germany's answer, one might almost say, to our own Dame Eva Turner. Now, to end this programme, I'd like to offer you another delightful example of Tiana Lemnitz revelling in the art of understatement. It's a number in folk song style by a composer named Rasch, and it's sung by another of our virtuous German maidens who happens to have fallen in love at first sight. My soul trembles in your hands, she sings. Tu ihr kein Leid, do it no hurt. And it's hard to imagine anybody ignoring an appeal as tenderly expressed as this is by Tiana Lemnitz.
Tiana Lemnitz, singing a German folk song recorded in 1940, ends this week's Singer's Choice.